You're in a meeting. Someone's tone shifts slightly, a little colder, a little shorter, and you immediately feel it. Not just notice it, feel it. In your chest. You start running through the last 5 minutes. Did you say something wrong? Is she upset? Should you fix it? Meanwhile, your colleague across the table didn't even register the tone change. He's thinking about lunch. This isn't anxiety. Well, it's not only anxiety. It's a skill you built very early, because at some point in your childhood, reading the room wasn't optional. It was survival. Maybe your mom came home from work exhausted and on the edge, and you learned to sense her mood before she even took off her coat. Maybe your dad went quiet after a bad day, and you learned that quiet meant danger. Maybe no one was dramatic or cruel. They were just unavailable, and you became the one who kept everything running smoothly. I remember being 12 and genuinely proud that my parents never had to worry about me. I thought that made me mature. It took me years to understand it just meant I had learned to disappear. We're not here to give you a label. We're here to understand where that constant scanning comes from and why it's not a personality flaw. It's a very precise adaptation. There's a term for this in psychology, parentification. It was first described in the 1970s by family therapist Salvador Minuchin, and it refers to a dynamic where a child takes on adult emotional or functional responsibilities within the family system. And here's the first aha. This doesn't require bad parents. It doesn't even require a dramatic childhood. It just requires a gap between what the adults in the room could handle and what the situation demanded. And the child, being wired for attachment above all else, fills that gap. Neuroscience gives us the second piece. Children's brains are extraordinarily plastic. The circuits that form in response to chronic stress, specifically the circuits in the amygdala and prefrontal cortex, don't just activate during childhood, they become the default operating system. When you spend years monitoring an unpredictable environment, your nervous system stops treating vigilance as a response and starts treating it as a baseline. That's why, decades later, you feel your colleague's tone shift from across a conference table. Your brain isn't being paranoid. It's running a program that kept you safe at age 9. The third piece comes from attachment research. Psychologist John Bowlby described attachment as the primary organizing force in human development. Children need to feel that at least one adult is reliably available, not perfect, just available. When that reliability is inconsistent, the child doesn't conclude the parent is unreliable. The child concludes, I need to do more to secure this connection. That's the origin of the pattern. Not trauma in the dramatic sense, just a child doing the most logical thing available to them, becoming indispensable. And now, here's where things get interesting. Let's be honest about what this costs first, because one of the things parentified people are very good at is explaining away their own difficulty. The first cost is the one that shows up in your calendar app, your AirPods in on a Sunday afternoon, your inability to just sit with a cup of coffee and do nothing. Rest feels unsafe, not lazily uncomfortable, unsafe. Because for years, the moment you stopped being useful, something happened. Someone needed you. A situation deteriorated. Your value in the system was directly tied to your function. So your nervous system made a very reasonable calculation. Stillness equals risk. This is why you check your WhatsApp when you're on vacation. This is why doing nothing feels like a vague moral failing. This is why you feel guilty watching a show when there are dishes in the sink, even if you live alone. The second cost is the one that surfaces every time someone asks, "How are you, really?" And you say, "Fine, thanks," and immediately redirect to them. You know how to hold space for other people's emotions. You've been doing it since you were 8. What you were never taught, because there was no one to teach you, is how to occupy that space yourself. How to say, "I'm struggling," without immediately softening it, explaining it, or reframing it as a question about the other person. He sees it like this: "I'm just a private person." She sees it like this: "He never lets me in." Both are right. Both are running old programs. He learned that vulnerability was a burden. She learned that distance means rejection. Neither of them is the problem. They're in a collision between two old adaptations. The third cost is the quietest one. It's the faint, persistent sense that you don't entirely know who you are, separate from your function. What do you actually like? Not what are you good at, not what do people need from you. What do you want when no one is watching and nothing is required? Many people who grew up too fast genuinely don't know, not because they're uninteresting, because that question, "What do I want?" was never safe to ask. Now the other side. The same wiring that creates these costs also creates something real. Your ability to read a room is not a pathology. It is an extraordinary social intelligence that most people simply don't have. Your capacity to be steady in a crisis, to think about others before yourself, to notice the one person in the group who's struggling. These aren't things you perform. They're built into your nervous system. The question is not whether these traits are valuable. They are. The question is whether you have access to a choice, whether you can turn the scanner off when it's not needed, whether you can receive care, not just give it, whether being still doesn't feel like a threat. Your brain is not broken. It built exactly the right structure for the environment it was in. The environment has changed. The structure hasn't caught up yet. Here's the shift I want to offer, and it's not accept yourself or love your inner child, because those phrases have been sanded down to nothing. The shift is this. The child who took on adult responsibilities was not weak. That child was responding to a real gap with real intelligence. The problem isn't that they did it. The problem is that no one ever told them they could stop. That's the actual gap. Not a character flaw that needs to be healed. A permission that was never given. Which means the work isn't reconstruction. It's more like updating a setting that was never changed because no one knew it could be changed. What does that look like practically? It looks like tolerating, for slightly longer each time, the discomfort of not fixing something that isn't yours to fix. It looks like saying, "I don't know," without immediately following it with a solution. It looks like being in a conversation where someone is struggling and staying in it without becoming their therapist. Not because those old responses are wrong, but because you get to decide now. That's the only thing that was missing. You are not the role you learned to play. You're the person who learned to play it, which means you can also learn something else. Here's what I want you to take from this. The hypervigilance, the guilt around rest, the difficulty asking for help, none of that is a character flaw. It's a coherent response to a specific context. Your brain did exactly what it was supposed to do. You didn't miss your childhood because you were irresponsible. You missed it because you were needed, and you answered. The question worth sitting with this week: what would you allow yourself to want, if wanting things wasn't something you had to earn first?